Hello, and welcome to Remember the Film, the podcast where you don't own us because we don't exist.
Ooh, you don't own us.
For those listening, we spent like 20 minutes trying to find a quote for this movie that wouldn't be disrespectful or sound weird as a joke.
It's bleak.
It's a dark movie. I think this is the most serious movie that I think we've covered like grim films, but they might have been thrillers or something like that. This is just a really dark, complex film. It's hard to make
It's a charged topic. There's a lot to dive into.
Well, it's also arguably a thriller, but, maybe in a way that's different than thrillers we've covered before, I think, is probably the fair way to say it. Yeah,
not in the same way. So the movie we're talking about this week, our film to remember, is the Steven Spielberg film Munich, which we'll get more into in a minute. But of course, first, let us introduce ourselves. I'm Hugo, as usual, and with me are Josh Bradley and Grizz, Jeff Grizz Ulrich. I get so confused with having to say Grizz. I get so confused with having to say...
A stroke of genius.
I get so confused with having to say Grizz that I forget to say Jeff.
It just falls out of my mouth because you didn't go to Notre Dame in the late 2000s, early 2010s, and if you had,
I did not.
You would call him Grizz with such ease as I do. Hey, Grizz.
It's literally all they know me as.
Yes.
Hearing me referred to as Jeff is like, it's mind melting.
It's like hearing your parent called their first name by someone. You're like, no,
you're like, that's disrespectful. Call them by their name.
That's name Mom.
Is Dad.
So we're all cheerful for now. We'll get not as cheerful later. But before we get into our actual movie for this week, as we've been doing, what have we been watching this week? Who would like to start? I think Grizz has watched a bunch of movies, so this week we'll start with Josh.
Yeah. Let's start with Josh.
I haven't watched a bunch. I pulled out... Well, first of all, update from last weekend. I did not watch At World's End, Pirates of the Caribbean. I did not finish the trilogy this week, but maybe this coming week I will. Instead this week,
the movie is 15 hours long, if I remember correctly.
That's true. This week I pulled out my Blu-ray of Mad Max Fury Road, and I watched that movie start to finish, which, oh man, does not get old and is still as mind-boggling as when I saw it 6-7 years ago at this point.
I read an interesting article recently about Mad Max Fury Road. I had no idea how much Charlize Theron and Tom Hardy did not get along.
Well, it's interesting you read an article about it because the reason the movie is generating a bunch of ink right now, and part of the reason I watched it this week is because this week a book was released called Blood, Sweat, and Chrome. It's basically like a making-of book. It was written by Kyle Buchanan of the New York Times, who follows me on Twitter, by the way, not to brag.
Wow.
He wrote a book just basically interviewing everyone from Tom Hardy, Charlize Theron, George Miller, PAs, stunt people, everyone. And the fact that movie even exists is insane. The fact that it's like also one of the best action movies ever made is even more insane. But like... So I watched the movie this week, and I also watched a bunch of the behind-the-scenes stuff on the Blu-ray in anticipation of the book. I also bought a copy of the book a month ago, and I was able to pick it up this week for the first time. But like the making of is insane. First of all, they shot it in 2012. It didn't come out until 2015, and like,
if I'm not wrong, they didn't even shoot it all at once. Like there were multiple instances of shooting. Like they had some shots from before they even had actors. Like. I can't completely confirm that, but I bet that's true. That I believe that. And like, I mean, originally the movie didn't really have a script. It just had 3,500 storyboards, So like that was their script, was just a bunch of hand-drawn pictures, and that's what they went out there with basically. I can say, even though I haven't read the book yet, I do know that no one knew what they were making. Like Charlize Theron and Tom Hardy were out there. Like no wonder there was like tension on set because they're just out in Nambia for 6 months. And, or I'm sorry, I probably said the wrong country, but whatever it is. And, like, they don't have the vision that George Miller does. So, like, they're just kind of putting their trust in his hands, hoping he can turn whatever they're doing out there into something. And then 3 years later, he comes back with, Mad Max Fury Road. Again, one of the best action movies ever created. It's wild. And so, that's the only thing I watched. But I'm excited to dig into Blood, Sweat, and Chrome. And it's like... I think I saw an interview with Tom Hardy saying that there were times where he would just be inside a truck and George Miller would come over and he would say, just turn your head that way and look confused. And that was the shot. There was no information, no script. And like, no so they all thought it was going to be a disaster.
Yeah.
And it comes out a masterpiece. So.
That's kind of how, I think that's how that was made. And, you know, it kind of makes you stop and think, like, you know, I think about the filmmaking a lot as I'm watching movies nowadays. And like, it does make you realize that movies are just a bunch of images stitched together. You know, whether it's 500 to 2,000 images, like, but like this is more 3,500 images, but that's all it is. And like actors don't need to know what they're looking at when they look off screen. All you need is like a shot of Tom Hardy looking this direction, looking confused, and then you'll put it together later. And that's it. You know, actors do sometimes have to put their trust into a director's hands, and luckily they have a genius like George Miller putting their.
If I were a director who needed an actor to look confused, I would actually do something confusing off camera. Like somebody like a clown walks in.
I think under ideal conditions, your actors and everyone making the movie is more like in the know and in tune with what the overall vision is. But in this case, they kind of couldn't do that, but it still turned out great. But that's why you read articles about it, Grizz.
Yeah, it was because people were talking
things
about
written in the book. Yeah, so like he covers Charlize Theron's and Tom Hardy's feud in the book, so it's getting written about now. Yeah, among other things, I'm sure.
So tell me more about that feud when you get into it, because it sounded like pretty intense.
I mean, the stuff that I read is that Charlize Theron's apparently a consummate professional. Yeah. And full disclosure, my wife, through the course of her job a few years ago, had to basically put on an event that honored Charlize Theron, so she interfaced with Charlize Theron's people a good amount. So, like, there's a very, very oblique personal connection, but, like, from all I've heard from insiders and not insiders, she's just a wonderful person, very good to work with, and again, a consummate professional. And Tom Hardy is like one of those method guys who kind of has a weird, unconventional process which can be grating on people. And I think that's my understanding of what the feud was about. Is like Charlize Theron would get there on time, be ready, know her lines, be in makeup, and Tom Hardy would show up hours late and that kind of stuff. And you know, they're in the desert, not great working conditions, so like
tensions were probably high in the first place. Yeah. But very interesting. But so that's all you watched this week?
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Well, just one, but a great one.
Yeah, good pick.
Very great one, yes.
I watched a ton of movies in this last week.
Lay them on me.
In preparation for the Oscars coming up, I watched a lot.
I just looked at your lists. They're all recent.
They're all very recent, and all of them except for one are nominated for Academy Awards. The one that was not that I watched was The King's Man.
Well, that might be nominated next year. It came out in January.
Did it?
Yeah.
I thought it came out Christmas Day.
Did it come out Christmas Day?
It came out in January. It was delayed. It was originally slated for 2021 and it was delayed.
I mean, it is listed as a 2021 film. Yep, December 22nd. You're right.
Okay. Oh. So not Christmas Day, but it was
now.
The Christmas window. But in any case, it's fun. If you like the Kingsman movies, it's more of that. They play with historical events in an interesting way. I will say there's a big surprise moment that I was like, "Oh, really?" and I was not satisfied by the big surprise, but it was still fun. But all the Academy Award nominated movies that I watched were The Eyes of Tammy Faye, which Jessica Chastain is nominated for Best Actress for her performance as Tammy Faye. I feel like Hugo would absolutely hate this movie. I mean, just hate it so much.
just the thought of it makes me cringe. I'm like, nah, I don't need to see this.
But very compelling performances. So I'm fine with her nomination for that role. Spencer.
How do you feel about the movie overall?
Oh, the movie overall, it's a good movie. I'll never watch it again, but it's good. Spencer, Kristen Stewart. I mean, after watching this, I said this in my letterboxd review. It's very clear that the Twilight movies are bad, and it's not the fault of Robert Pattinson or Kristen Stewart at all. Like, it's very clear that they are capable of acting. The Tragedy of Macbeth. Finally got around to that. It's the most stylistic interpretation of Shakespeare I have ever seen.
It's wildly beautiful to look at.
Something to behold.
Wildly, yeah.
Yeah. It could win both the Oscars for cinematography and production design that it's nominated for,
Good.
and it still wouldn't be getting enough credit for how stylistic it is. That's what I said in my Letterboxd review for that.
Even if you don't think you're gonna like it, and maybe you won't like it, everyone should just like check that out.
I mean, it's Shakespeare, so like it's really dense,
and it's Denzel freaking bringing it. Like he has not lost a step in 40 years of doing this. Like he's still freaking bringing it, man.
So I do highly recommend The Tragedy of Macbeth. Flea, which is nominated for Best Animation and Best Documentary,
and Best International Feature.
Yeah, and Best International Feature. And
it's the first movie to get all three of those.
It is.
Which
a truly unique
at this point,
experience.
Do you think it's likely to win too? Because I feel like international feature is definitely Drive My Cars to lose.
I think so.
With Flea getting support across multiple categories, maybe they will give it animation even over.
It's so hard to beat the powerhouses in animation.
Well, animation and documentary, I think, are both uniquely difficult to predict. But I would think it's going to win one of those, and I would think documentary over animation, but it could win both. I don't know.
It's really if you haven't looked into it at all, it's obviously we're talking about it's an animated film, but it's interspersed with real footage from the events that are taking place in this movie. It's if you've ever seen Persepolis, it very reminiscent of a lot of the stories from Persepolis, which was also an Academy Award nominated. I forget, did it win Best Animation?
Good
Regardless,
question,
it was a fantastic animated film as well. I really, really liked Flea.
You should mention that it's about an Afghani refugee, and like the reason it's animated is to protect the identity of the person that it's a documentary about, which I think is very interesting.
Well, and not just an Afghani refugee, but an openly gay Afghani refugee, which is an even more unique perspective. And I didn't know that going in. I knew it was about a refugee going into the movie, but it's very, very interesting. I saw Licorice Pizza, and I can't really put a particular finger on what I like about it, but it's very likable.
I think that's a good way to put it. After reviewing, like that's definitely where I was. I walked out and like I turned to my two friends I saw it with, and like we weren't really saying much. There wasn't much that I could like intellectualize at the moment, but like I knew I loved it. Yeah. And then on second watch, I was able to intellectualize more, I think.
And it's fun the tie between Paul Thomas Anderson and Philip Seymour Hoffman, and now Paul Thomas Anderson and Philip Seymour Hoffman's son. He was good. I can't believe this was his first movie. Like he was legitimately talented from the jump. Very good.
Alana Haim is awesome.
Well, this is her. I don't know if this was her first. Was this her first movie, or because she's been writing? She had several writing credits listed on her IMDb.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
But as far as I know, it's her first movie. An interesting tidbit is like a lot of Haim, the band's videos are directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. So obviously he knew some of her acting talent beforehand.
And then I watched Coming to America, which is nominated for hairstyles and makeup.
Makeup, yeah.
And honestly, it deserves a nomination in that category. Some of these characters go through so many different hairstyles in the movie, and they all look incredible. So I'm far from an expert on it, but I get it with this one. Like, obviously, wouldn't deserve to be nominated in any other categories. But the hairstyling, very good. And then I watched House of Gucci, which I did not like.
I enjoyed it. Sorry. Sorry, both.
I feel like I should watch House of Gucci just to have an educated opinion on it, but I don't know.
Hugo, I don't know how you're going to get past the accents. I don't know how you'll do it.
I feel like I'm uniquely positioned to not enjoy it. But I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'll watch it. Also, by the way, Persepolis was nominated for Best Animated Feature, and it lost to a little movie called Ratatouille.
Oh, that's right.
So, yeah.
Dang. Should have known that.
Just one of the greatest animated movies ever made. So,
right.
It's all right.
But check out Persepolis. Really, really good. Yeah. But yeah, House of Gucci, I was borderline offended by Jared Leto's performance. And I'm not even Italian. Like, not even a little bit Italian.
I don't think... Okay. Just, I am Italian. I have seen some clips of the performance. I I just don't think there's any reason to be offended.
Yeah, I think you're making way too much of it. Yeah.
I think it's whatever. But I think from all the clips that I've seen, again, I've not seen the whole movie, it just seems like he's in a different film.
Yeah, he is. It's in this movie, it looks like he went to the Charles Martinet acting school to learn how to be Italian. Charles Martinet is, of course, the voice of Mario.
Well, again, I will point out, you say he's a different movie. I will point out again that in the movie, his father is played by Al Pacino. So be raised by Al Pacino, and we'll see how much of a clown you grow up to be. I think you would grow up to be about the amount of clown that Jared Leto is doing in that movie. I think it makes sense to me in universe.
Okay.
That is not unfair. Okay. My turn?
Your turn, bud.
Yes. So, what I did this week, I watched Munich at the end of last week, which impressed me so much that I wanted to pick it for the actual podcast. But I noticed that I only had like six Spielberg films left to complete his whole filmography, not including like the television episodes that he did. He directed Columbo, he directed a few TV movies that were supposed to be pilots. I did not watch those. But I did watch these 6 movies that I was missing, and I finished Spielberg's filmography. So I've watched everything he's ever made.
Congratulations. Yeah, that's awesome.
I even watched Amblin this week, just a short that got him the TV contract in the first place.
I'm just saying, that is like, I mean, we talk about watching an entire director's filmography, and we've done that a few times. We've talked about that. That watching all of Spielberg's filmography is not a small achievement. That is something. Yeah.
they kind of, most of them kind of happened organically, and I kind of just this week I noticed, there's only 6 left. I might as well just do it. Like I had a week where I was kind of not that busy, so I was like, I'll give it a try.
Well, so which ones did you watch?
Basically, there's some stinkers in there though. To be fair, I watched. Okay, in the order that I've seen them, I watched 1941, which is a film that I think. It's like a screwball comedy about mass hysteria after the Pearl Harbor attacks.
Yeah, it's like National Lampoon's World War II.
Yeah, and I think the premise is fantastic. I think it's a really, really funny idea to do a satire over. It just doesn't work. It's just not very funny. It's not dramatic. It's too long. It's like the editing is wild. Like a lot of the times that the end of a bit is cut right when you're supposed to laugh, and then you're already watching the next scene. It's a very strange movie. I didn't get it. Although it does have an incredible sequence at the beginning. The first scene of the movie is a Jaws gag where there's a naked woman swimming in the ocean, and we hear the Jaws music, and the camera comes up from underneath her, and it turns out that it's a Japanese sub, and she's stuck on the Japanese sub as the Jaws music is playing. That's fantastic. But the movie just doesn't really work. Then I watched Amistad, which is the movie he made in 1997 about the trial of a slave that had been found at sea. The slave trade had been abolished at the time, and so the trial is about ascertaining whether the slave was a legal slave at the time or not. It's a film that he shouldn't have made, in my opinion. It just doesn't. It's a major oversimplification of the issues that it's tackling with. It feels like it's kind of a prequel to Lincoln in a very weird way. And it's not. It's very historically. It's positioning this thing that actually happened in a way that has no reason to. That doesn't really fit into history. It wasn't an event that was as important as it's portrayed in the movie, and it has this weird, like schmaltzy ending where it's like and then we fixed it, and now we're good, and then the war happened, and we freed the slaves, and it's kind of just didn't work. That being said, it's so well made. The acting is amazing. The cinematography is incredible. So like it's a Spielberg movie from the 90s. So in some ways it's excellent, but it just doesn't really work.
Correct me if I'm wrong. That came out the same year as The Lost World, right?
It did. Yes.
So I think people have drawn comparisons between 1993 Spielberg and 1997 Spielberg, where he made a Jurassic Park movie and like a serious drama about a historic disenfranchisement, to say the least. And, like, it worked really, really well in both cases in 93, and just, like, both of them in 97 were just completely ill-conceived, probably, I think is my understanding.
They were movies that shouldn't have been made in the first place. At least not by Steven Spielberg.
I like The Lost World a little bit. I haven't seen Amistad, but The Lost World's nowhere near the first Jurassic Park.
Also, he had just funded DreamWorks, and he was the big asset of DreamWorks, and the idea was, we're going to get these big projects made, one big prestige drama and one more action-y movie, and we're going to start this studio. So it kind of feels like both were kind of rushed out the door, maybe not given the time to find the right people to make them, or the right story in the case of Lost World. Then I watched Always, which... I don't know.
I know nothing about that movie.
It's a movie about Richard Dreyfuss is he's a person that flies one of those airplanes that drops water on fires, like wildfires.
Okay.
I don't know how you call those. I can't remember the word. And he dies, but his spirit hangs around, and he has to kind of settle his life and accept his death and whatever.
Sounds interesting.
I have no idea. It's a cool premise. It doesn't really do anything with its characters. It's kind of like the characters don't feel like they actually change. It feels like, we're just following the spirit around for a few hours, and it just doesn't go anywhere. But it's very funny that it's the first movie I've ever seen with Audrey Hepburn in it, and she plays God in it, kind of. So that was cool. Not a great movie, but whatever. Then I watched War Horse, which it just makes me laugh. It's a film that is so incredibly beautiful and well made, and has some of the most astonishing sequences I've ever seen in a war film. But also, the protagonist of the movie and the point of view character is a horse. So
when you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous.
It is. It's absolutely ridiculous. It makes no sense. And yet, by the end of it, you care about this horse because the film is so well made and it's so poetic in many ways. And it is, like, a reviewer that I like, David Sims, he works at The Atlantic. He also has a podcast. And his review is, there's a really, really great World War I movie here if you cut all the horse scenes. And that's kind of true. But at the same time, I feel like, as silly as it is, it kind of works because he's so good at making it. This was nominated for Best Picture, and I'm like, that's
I think that's a little bit of Spielberg's coattails dragging that one into.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but it is what
2011 was weird in terms of Best Picture nominees. It was really, really, really weird.
Drive was that year, wasn't it? Wasn't nominated.
It was that year. It was not nominated for Best Picture, but that came out that year. Yeah.
Well, what were the nominees that year? Do you remember, Josh?
Well, The Artist won, and
great movie.
Some other nominees were Moneyball, which is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah.
Tree of Life, which is just a masterpiece if there's ever been one made. But also, like, The Help was nominated, and Extremely Loud, Incredibly Close, which is one of the few movies with a Rotten Tomato score that was nominated for Best Picture.
There's
The Descendants, which is a movie that people liked.
Clooney, right?
I haven't seen. Hugo, which people liked. I have not seen. Not our co-host, but the Martin Scorsese movie.
Yep.
I don't know.
And Midnight in Paris.
It just kind of seems like
Midnight
a lot
in
of
Paris. Yeah,
I do like
Strange
Midnight in
year.
Paris.
It was a strange
A lot of
year.
movies getting in there based on the person who directed them. I think more so than them actually being incredible.
I think I also just hold that year kind of in a weird place, just because like I've seen most of the Best Picture nominees, at least like 7 out of 9, for example, like most years for the last 15 years, and I still 10 years later have only seen like 4 of those. I just did not. That Oscars just kind of slipped by me, and I have not yet gone back to revisit them.
Well, you were still in college.
I was still in college, but that didn't stop me the other 3 years I was in college. It just stopped me this year for some reason.
Hugo is a Spielberg movie directed by Martin Scorsese. That's what I'll say about it.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's good. I really like it.
Maybe Munich is a Scorsese movie directed by Spielberg in that case.
In some weird way, yeah. Although Scorsese, I don't think Scorsese could have made this one specifically just because of the subject matter, but we'll get into it. I also watched the last 2 that were left, Empire of the Sun and Lincoln, which are the 2 that I actually liked a lot.
Empire of the Sun is great.
I think Empire of the Sun is really good. The cinematography is just incredible. There are some shots in that movie that I'm just looking at it, and it's like the first time that I felt, oh, this is just kind of live action Miyazaki in some weird way.
It's the obsession with aircraft.
There's the obsession with aircraft, but even in the way the movie is shot sometimes, where the camera will just wander off and look at the sky for a few seconds. It's a beautiful film. I didn't connect to it emotionally as much as I think the film wants me to overall, but still really, really good. And finally, I watched Lincoln, which is a film that is incredibly well made. The performances are just ridiculous. Like you can barely tell that's Daniel Day-Lewis, but that's him just being one of the greatest actors to ever work in this industry. I don't know how I feel about the end of the film still. First of all, I think this is a problem with a lot of Spielberg movies. Unfortunately, there's like 5 minutes at the end that you could cut and you don't need them at all. Like, we know Lincoln dies. We don't need to see Lincoln in his bed. And sorry for spoiling Lincoln, but it's history.
No, that's not a spoiler.
We don't need to see Lincoln lying in his bed and like with blood on the cushion and the people looking around. And like, I feel like the film does this thing where the other characters treat Lincoln as if they knew he was going to die. And that just did not work for me. And also, like, the film ends in such a sense of optimism, which I think reflects... we'll talk about this a tiny bit later, but I think it kind of reflects the moment in time when it was made. Like, this is the Obama administration.
The Obama years. Yeah, why not be optimistic, Hugo?
Yeah.
Things are looking up.
But
things are great.
You know
now.
what I mean? Yeah, I don't know if Spielberg would have made the same story, post 2016 or pre 2008. I don't think he would have had the same exact ending that the movie has, but
he does.
Maybe he would, and I'm just interpreting too much.
Spielberg does frequently have an optimistic, outlook.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean,
I agree.
It makes sense, and
he does.
Certainly,
but
in terms of Lincoln's story. Yes, Lincoln gets assassinated, but the events of Lincoln's presidency, especially the last few years, were very good in the grand scheme of things for the future of America. Now, did we screw a lot of it up after that? Yeah, of course.
But it still took like 100 years for the, like it's. I feel like the film is ending in a place that I just don't, that I've never been at. I've always been way more cynical than the film is in terms of politics and in terms of the themes that the film is going for and in terms of the way I see history. So I just kind of...
I do always think it's fascinating.
I was kind of taken aback.
Hugo and I are both very into politics and political history and stuff like that, but we have such diametrically opposed views where I'm like, no, some good can come out of this stuff. And Hugo's like, no, the world is a terrible, bleak place. And
I don't want to.
That's why I love Munich so much.
I don't want to speak out of turn, but that honestly may just come down to the fact that you're American and you're European, and like that may give you like you're an optimist and you're not an optimist. Like you have Hugo, you have a longer lens of history than me or Grizz do because just of where you live, and that might inform your just overall optimism and worldview in an interesting way. I think.
Maybe. But which is, interestingly, the reason why I think Munich, our film to remember for this week, is so incredible. Because it's kind of uncharacteristically cynical, but not cynical in a negative way. I think cynical in a very realistic, real-world way. And I think it fits into Spielberg's filmography in an interesting way because it's kind of different from other things that he's done.
I definitely agree, yes.
So, boilerplate for Munich. Let's try to get through it quickly. We've talked about movies this week, but it kind of made sense. The movie was released in December 2005. It was directed by Steven Spielberg and co-written by Tony Kushner and Eric Roth. Two
powerhouses.
Names in Hollywood,
yes.
Excellent screenwriters. Yes. It's the first collaboration between Kushner and Spielberg, but he would work together with him again on Lincoln, West Side Story, and even The Fabelmans. That is his upcoming movie for this year.
Real quick, Tony Kushner, if you don't know his name, he wrote Angels in America, which is probably one of the great works of the last 50 years in any medium. So a genius if there ever was one, Tony Kushner, I think, personally.
Yeah.
And it's definitely worth reading Angels in America. I mean, obviously, if you can see a stage production of it, even better. But just reading.
There's also a movie version on HBO, made-for-TV movie on HBO that Mike Nichols made 20 years ago that you can watch right now on HBO Max.
It's very, very powerful stuff. Go ahead, Hugo.
The movie, the script for this was mostly based on the book Vengeance by George Jonas, but it also had some accounts from sources who had actually participated in the operation. These sources are anonymous. Some have been disputed. There's some criticism of the film where some people say, "Oh, it's unrealistic. It's not true that that people were actually going through this. That they had doubts." But according to the writers, there were some sources that were inside kind of the actual operation the movie is portraying. The rest of the crew for the film is basically Spielberg's usual collaborators. We have Kathleen Kennedy producing, Michael Kahn editing, Janusz Kaminski as the cinematographer, and John Williams doing the score, which, all incredible names in Hollywood.
I just wanted to say, while John Williams is on here, I love John Williams. He's my favorite composer.
Yes.
Full stop. It's not until the last song in the movie that I really feel like it excels. The rest of the movie, it's like I feel like the music is fine, but it's not, magical.
I think what the best thing that John Williams does for this movie is get out of the way, because I don't think I think he does very very good, but not not stuff.
He's not drawing your attention away.
Yeah,
from
that
what's
doesn't
happening.
kind of overtake what's actually happening on the screen.
It's not the usual soaring, ostentatious.
It's just building.
brass.
It's just kind of building the tension, and that's all you need for this.
Well, there's multiple scenes where there's like I'm actually okay. As usual, I have the movie on mute behind me and behind the while we're talking, and like right now they're trailing the guy in Rome, like the author poet in Rome, and like during that scene, it's like a very percussive like a heartbeat as they're following him, because it's building up the tension. In that he does that quite a few scenes, but other than that, there's a lot of scenes where there's no music at all, which kind of makes it more stark and austere. And like you said, Hugo, he's getting out of his own way, and it's appropriate to the movie.
But it's so unusual. Like when you look at John Williams' history, like I say, he doesn't excel. Like the music is not like the score is not super memorable, as opposed to most of his other ones.
Yeah, it's not what you remember,
But the final song, as the movie is ending, is excellent.
And the sex scene, honestly, if I'm being honest, like the music during the sex scene, which I'm sure we'll have to talk about at some point.
We'll talk about the sex scene, yeah. That's, famous sex scene. The movie made $131 million worldwide. Can you imagine this movie coming out today? It would barely make any money compared to this. 47 in North America, and the budget was around 70 million. So it kind of almost doubled the budget, which is pretty good. I don't know. I don't think that this movie would have had
the marketing budget, as we always.
Yeah, I don't know if this movie would have had a gigantic marketing campaign compared to like more of a blockbuster film. I'm not entirely sure.
Well, this was the same year that War of the Worlds came out, and I'm sure that was the much more marketed Spielberg movie, because it had Tom Cruise and aliens, that kind of stuff.
There are quite a few times throughout his career where he makes a more like sci-fi action film and at the same time a more serious drama, and I think he's leveraging one against the other.
That's exactly what it is.
To get the giant budgets that he's able to get, even for the more
one for them, one for me.
Yeah. The reception for the movie was positive overall, but it is often considered Spielberg's most controversial film for reasons that we will, I think, discuss for most of the runtime of this podcast. It was nominated for 5 Academy Awards. It got Best Picture, Best Director, Adapted Screenplay, Editing, and Score. So we were talking about not the score not standing out, but it was nominated. But it was also a time where John Williams is doing a score. Let's just
give him another nomination.
Yeah, because I mean he deserves it. I can't even be mad about it.
Do you have the winners pulled up? Anybody have the winners pulled up? I'll see if I can do this offhand.
I'll get it up real quick.
But I'll do it.
Okay, so Best Picture, this is 2005 movie, so that would have been Crash, right? For Best
2006.
Best Picture?
Yes.
So it lost to Crash for Best Picture, which means it would have lost to Ang Lee for Best Director.
It did,
right?
Yes.
And I also believe Brokeback won Adapted Screenplay, is that right?
Brokeback won Adapted Screenplay,
So it lost Adapted Screenplay to Brokeback. And the editing, I can't remember offhand, but would it have been... Not also Crash, right?
I can't find the editing. Give me a second.
I found
Crash.
Film editing. Crash.
Crash also won.
Wow, shot in the dark, and I have no idea what would have won score. Maybe like Capote or something.
Original score was won by Brokeback Mountain.
Oh, okay. I got 4 or 5 off the top of my head.
good.
That's not bad for an Oscar 17 years ago, or
I will never not be impressed by your Oscar knowledge. I wanted to single out a quote from Roger Ebert's review of the film because it kind of really gets to the core of why I think this is so good. He says, "With this film, Spielberg has dramatically opened a wider dialogue, helping to make the inarguable into the debatable," which I think is a very poignant way of looking at this film. It's a film that's portraying, the Israel-Palestine dynamic in a time where any mention of, not being completely pro-Israel is, gets accused, as it did a few years ago.
As the movie did, yeah.
As it does recently, it gets accusation of anti-Semitism, it gets an accusation of being a self-hating Jew, but we'll talk about it. But I think that Ebert quote really, really understands what the movie is doing. Okay, very quickly, the premise for the film is that, so the film stars Eric Bana as Avner Kaufman, Daniel Craig as Steve, who's the driver. Daniel Craig is a really weird casting choice for this movie, by the way. I think he's extremely blonde. Ciarán Hinds as Carl, who's a former army of Israel, and he's in charge of cleaning up the crime scenes. Matthew Kasowitz as Robert. He's supposed to be Belgian in this. He's a toy/bomb maker. Hans Zischler as document forger Hans. They are 5 Mossad agents. Mossad is part of the Israeli intelligence, who are recruited by the Israeli government to hunt down and assassinate a list of 11 Palestinian leaders of a group called Black September, who all had a role in organizing the kidnapping and eventual killing of Israeli athletes at the 1972 Olympics in Munich. The mission is coordinated by Ephraim, who's played by Jeffrey Rush. Almost unrecognizable. I don't know why, but he jumps out as being...
That's exactly what Jeffrey Rush looks like.
No, I know, but the way he sounds, I don't know, there's something about him where it was like, oh yeah, that is Jeffrey Rush. But I don't know. There was something about it. I don't know.
I mean, it's not Captain Barbosa, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, but whatever.
I mean, if you took scenes of him in Munich and put them next to scenes from the King's Speech, I'm like, yeah, that's the same guy.
You think? Okay, maybe I just had this weird image in my head. And the mission is completely off the books, so there's no actual official relationship between them and the Israeli government.
They all resign from Mossad in order to carry out. They have
to resign from Mossad. They go abroad and they get money sent to them.
They're paid under the table. Yeah.
Yeah, in a random bank account in Switzerland.
It's always Switzerland.
Yeah,
which is what was you were referencing in your opening quote for the podcast, like that we don't exist. Yeah,
they don't exist. Eric Bana, as I said, it plays the leader of the group, Avner Kaufman. He is the point of view character for the whole story. His wife, we also get the introduction of his wife at the beginning of the film. She's called Daphne, played by Ayelet Zureh, who I believe is an actual Israeli actress, the only one in the movie. You might recognize her from being Vanessa in the Daredevil series. But that's where I recognize her from anyway. Yeah.
I was trying to place her.
Yeah. The wife is pregnant at the beginning of the film, and he has to cut all contact with her. We do catch up with her a few times throughout the movie, but he basically has to leave his family and pretend that they don't even exist.
Can't tell them what he's doing.
Can't tell them what he's doing. Yeah. She knows, obviously, that he's a Mossad agent, and she understands. She's very, I guess, supportive of it, because she decides to stay with him, even though they won't be able to speak for months, even years. Throughout the mission, I think which is the crucial point of the film, the group becomes increasingly sort of disillusioned, and they start to have more arguments about the morality of what they're doing, the actual usefulness of what they're doing. Not all of them. Some are more convinced than others of the righteousness of their actions. And throughout the film, we're also introduced to Louis, who is this informant played by Mathieu Amalric, who gives them information and finds the name on the list.
Yes.
Just a note
finds
on
their
the
targets,
fact.
basically. Locates their targets.
Yes. Yeah. Just a note on the film. The characters, in the sense of who their names are and the actual specificity of each character, of each member of the group, are fictional. Meaning that they're kind of based on Mossad agents, but they're not specifically based on individual people, except for Avner, who is based on someone who I can't remember the name of. And but the details of the operations are kept mostly factual. So the actual assassinations are pretty on point with the facts of what actually happened. So that's boilerplate, and let's start talking about the movie. So I would like to start with some general thoughts about the film itself. We'll get into the controversy and sort of the themes of the movie later on, but what did you guys think of this? I in my opinion, this might be Spielberg's most underrated film that he's made, and I think it's my favorite from him that he's made in the 21st century. So in the last 22 years.
It's up there for me.
Yeah, I don't know how you guys feel about it.
It's definitely in the conversation.
It's interesting you call it underrated because I would agree, but I don't want to extrapolate my own experience onto other people, but I certainly underrated it in a lot of ways, just because I didn't I was in high school when it came out. I think I saw War of the Worlds when it came out, which was the same year, and I did not see this, and I never even really considered seeing this, and 15 years go by, and I didn't really come back to it until last year when we were talking about Spielberg on this podcast, and so I just kind of watched it on a whim and was kind of blown away by how good it was. I kind of expected it to be the 21st century Spielberg is kind of I think underappreciated in general, but I didn't realize how much this movie in particular would be underappreciated. Again, at least in terms of how I appreciated the movie, because I watched it. It's just I was blown away by how good it was. I'm like, man, what have I been doing for the last 15 years? Not watching Munich. It's
I think
really
maybe
good.
this kind of falls into this idea that I think there's a perception of 21st century Spielberg that is, he's making dad movies and his action movies aren't as good as they used to be, and I think both are kind of not entirely true. I think this is great both as a serious drama as a very tense thriller. And I think some of the movies that get pegged with, this is kind of a boring Oscar movie like Bridge of Spies and The Post are really, really good.
Bridge of Spies rules. I haven't seen The Post, so again, my fault there. But Bridge of Spies
I did like The Post as well.
Yes. So it's funny you say that, both that it works as a thriller and as an Oscar movie, but so both it working as a thriller and my underrating of the movie. I should say that my pop culture reference point for this movie before actually seeing the movie was Knocked Up. In the first act of Knocked Up, when they go to the nightclub and where Allison and Ben meet, where Seth Rogen and Katherine Heigl meet, before they meet, Seth Rogen's sitting around with his roommates and just talking, just kind of shooting the shit. And he says,
your movie I just saw again the other day, which is fucking mind-blowing, and I haven't seen it since it came out, is Munich.
Oh, Munich! Munich fucking rules. Munich is awesome.
That movie was Eric Bana kicking fucking ass. Through every movie with Jews, we're the ones getting killed. Munich flips it on its ear. We're Captain Mother.
Not only killing, but fucking taking names.
If any of us get laid tonight, it's because of Eric Bana.
I agree with that.
which I thought was funny. And again, it's just, they are, as to Hugo's point, probably taking the complete wrong message. I don't think you're supposed to watch this and say, yeah, kicking ass and taking names, that kind of stuff. But that's was my only pop culture reference to this movie for many years until I actually sat down and watched it. And I think Ben and his friends may have kind of missed the mark a little bit in their assessment of Munich. Yeah.
As far as my interpretation of is this the most underrated, like I said, it's definitely in the picture, but I'm looking at, based on letterboxd average ratings from all their users, I might still give it to Sugarland Express for being most underrated, or possibly Minority Report, which is just...
Even just in general, when people talk about what are the great Spielberg movies, I don't think many people mention this one at all. I think even in the 21st century, people mention Catch Me If You Can or Minority Report more.
Well, I would agree with
this
that
one
for
kind
sure.
of.
I mean, I like those more.
I do too.
I don't know if they're better,
which is fine, but this one kind of gets lost in the shuffle. I think.
I agree. Again, at least
I think Sugarland Express gets lost. I mean, we've already talked about. We did a whole episode on Sugarland Express, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think Sugarland Express gets lost because it's one of his older movies, and there are much...
It's not Jaws, yeah.
It's not Jaws. It gets lost back there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We also talked... We already mentioned, this is maybe possibly his most disillusioned film. We'll talk more about how he kind of reacts to the political landscape of the time, but this, I think, feels like the most disillusioned and unaffected film compared to the rest of the other one.
this and War of the Worlds are both kind of missing that classic Spielberg optimism.
Yeah,
that he's famous for.
I think Minority Report also. I think we can talk about this now. His filmography recently has kind of been following a trend where, based on what is going on in America with politics, he makes movies that kind of fit into that thematically. So in the Bush years, he made Minority Report, which is a movie about government surveillance in the years of the Patriot Act. War of the Worlds, which is clearly referencing 9/11 in many ways, and Munich, which is a movie that is, it's a movie about terrorism. It's about counter-terrorism. It's criticizing both sides. It's kind of trying to humanize both sides. It's a very complex film to come out in a time like that. Then in the Obama years, as we mentioned, you have Lincoln and Bridge of Spies, which in some ways are more conciliatory films politically. It's like,
they're both about diplomacy.
Yeah, we can get things done without violence and stuff like that. And then in the Trump years, he makes The Post, which is a film about the Watergate scandal.
It's the anti-fake
It's not the Watergate
news
scandal, but it's yeah, exactly. It's right in that age. And in some ways, even West Side Story is kind of weirdly fit into that. I think we were talking about this before
the fact that he made West Side Story. He made West Side Story during the Trump years, even though it didn't come out until the Biden years. But if you look at what West Side Story is, it kind of is reckoning with the fact that we actually haven't come that far since the 1950s, 1960s in terms of,
race relations.
Poor race relations, and also like people on the lower end of the economic ladder fighting each other instead of like recognizing their common ground and that kind of stuff. And that's a more cynical approach. Making West Side Story now is more cynical than making it in 1961.
What I do want to point out, though, is that while he does these movies that are very clear commentaries on things that are happening in the real world, he also has released, Crystal Skull, 1010, Ready Player One, BFG. Yeah, he makes these. He also still makes the fun Spielberg movies while he's doing all this. So this is where I think that overall, I think Spielberg has an overall optimism to his filmmaking career because for every hard-hitting, serious story he does, he also does one that's just about the fun.
Yeah,
that's true.
Well, so something I'll say, and Hugo, you referenced David Sims earlier in his podcast Blank Check, which they have a great series on Spielberg post DreamWorks, so from '97 on Spielberg movies.
Yeah.
And something they talk about is how like he lines up projects and then kind of chooses them on a whim. Like he has he has like 3 or 4 movies in pre-production at a given time, and he can just say, "Oh, I got 3 open months right now on the schedule. Let's make this one right now." And that's kind of how West Side Story got made very quickly. And like, but because of that,
like the Post was made while
the Post was made so quickly.
Yeah. In Ready Player One.
So, Ready Player One came out a year after the Post, but he actually shot the Post after he shot Ready Player One because again, he just had a few free months in the schedule. There's a script laying around from Liz Hannah that's been kind of touted around town. So let's call Meryl and call Tom and let's make this in a few months, and it'll be in theaters in 6 months, which is actually exactly what happened with the Post. But like I bring that up to say that like because of that, he can, maybe more than other directors of his ilk, can make a movie that's more in the moment and more responding, more reactive to his current feelings. Most movies like from conception to hitting screens is at least a good 3 years. So like it's hard to like comment on current events. But with Spielberg, because he can kind of make movies more on a whim, relatively speaking, like his personal feelings about the moment can be more infused into them. And I think you definitely see that. Definitely see that with Munich and War of the Worlds, which are direct 9/11 movies, like about the United States reaction to 9/11 in a big way, both of them.
Very much so. So, getting back to some last general thoughts, how do you feel about the film just as a piece of filmmaking? I say this because I think most of what we'll talk about is the controversy and the story, but I think the film is also underrated as just a film. I think it's a really good piece of like paranoia thriller. It has some incredible sequences of tension that I think we'll mention, but like, there's the scene where they're waiting for the bomb in the phone, and like the scene when they do the raid in Beirut with it has this incredible crane shot where it goes from one side of the fighting, comes back, shows someone from close, and then goes back up and you see the other side of the fighting. Like I just think as a piece of cinema is fantastic.
Well, we were talking about this just a little like before we started recording. We try not to have too much conversation about our topics before we actually start recording, but we did mention this movie has some great Spielberg wonders. We talked a little bit about how frequently we see things shot through windows, and I know that we're probably going to dive more into that later on. But yeah, I think I would describe it as surprisingly well shot. Like, it's not something that you're automatically thinking of while watching it. Your mind is drawn to other aspects of the movie, but when you actually stop and really look at how a scene is constructed, it is very impressive, and it makes sense. I mean, this is Spielberg. He can almost do this stuff in his sleep. What do you got, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of the opinion that Spielberg's maybe the most talented person to ever pick up a camera, in terms of like knowing where to put the camera and how to stage certain stuff. Like, I'm kind of working on a West Side Story review right now. I'm going to say similar things about West Side Story, but like whenever I watch how Spielberg stages a given scene, I'm just like, oh yeah, that's the right way to do it. Like there's 1,000 ways to stage a given scene, but every time I watch the way Spielberg does, I'm like, yeah, that's how this scene should be shot. That's exactly right. No notes. And I think
they have a segment about this. They have a segment about. Sorry to cut you off. They have a segment about Munich in the Spielberg documentary that was made in 2017, where he himself talks about this whole movie. All the sequences of tension are about geography. Like, it's just letting you know where all the characters are, understanding where we are in relation to each other, and that's what makes those sequences. And I think that's a really smart way of thinking about it. I don't know.
Yeah, and I also, this is kind of a bit of a different topic, but there are multiple assassinations in this. Obviously, that's kind of the whole premise, but it's interesting when we're ahead of it and when we're not. Like the first assassination, for example, of the poet in Rome, we don't know their plan beforehand, so like we watch them, trail this guy in real time, not really sure where it's going. And then for some of the other assassinations, like we watch them plan it and know exactly how it's supposed to go. And so when it doesn't go quite right, that's even more tense. I think the decision of when to tell us what information, I think, is interesting, and it really ups the tension for a lot of the set pieces.
Yes. So now it's time to finally get to the actual controversial nature of the film. So the film is portraying the Israel-Palestine dynamic. It's doing so through the personal journey of Avner, played by Eric Bana, who kind of starts from being, this very pro-Israel Mossad agent to, by the end, feeling like, why did we do all this? And he's kind of a broken human being. He has PTSD, he's paranoid.
Well, let's say that the movie is ostensibly about these Israeli agents assassinating these 11 individuals who are directly responsible for a terrorist attack. And by extension, the movie then becomes kind of more about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because these were Palestinian men that they're assassinating, again, ostensibly, but it begins, you should note, about just a direct response to an attack and like taking out the individuals responsible.
And Grizz, I think that serves to like deliberately set up the viewer's thought process and the whole thing. You hear like, we have 11 targets, and it's like, this sounds like the start of a great action movie. We get to see him take out all 11 people. It's going to be super hype. And then as the movie progresses, you're like, oh no, wait, this isn't that movie. This, I thought this was going to be fun, in quotes.
This doesn't feel good.
And this doesn't feel good.
The catharsis that this promise does not come.
Right. And so I think this is it's deceptive in its setup in the best possible way, because it really does make the impact of the overall message of the movie that much stronger, in my opinion.
Yeah, so the film for that was very controversial. It was considered anti-Israel. It was considered anti-Semitic by many Zionist advocates. One example is the Zionist Organization of America, which is the oldest and one of the largest pro-Israel organization in the US and in the world, which called for a boycott of the film and described Tony Kushner as an anti-Semite and an Israel hater. Of course, Steven Spielberg also made Schindler's List, so the fact that he was accused of this is absolutely ridiculous. He's just, just to state it out at the beginning, he's portraying something that really happened and trying to humanize this situation. But, And using Kushner's words.
Well, we should note that Steven Spielberg, Tony Kushner, and Eric Roth are all Jewish men.
Yeah, all Jewish men, yes.
So I think that's important to note in this subject matter. So,
Josh, you sent us this article, and using Kushner's word about the controversy, I'd like to just read out this little bit. He said, so in the article is written, I think, a month later or a few months later after the movie was released.
It's an op-ed that Tony Kushner wrote for the LA Times in direct response to kind of the backlash to the movie in January of 2006. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and he said, in the last month, the co-creators of Munich, of course, him, Eric Roth and Steven Spielberg, have been accused of being apologists for the Palestinians, apologists for Israel, defamers of Palestinian and of Israel, soft-headed Hollywood liberals, dupes of the radical left, dupes of the radical right, even of being anti-Semitic or self-loathing, for showing Jews talking about receipts and handling money. We're morally confused, overly complicated, simplistic. We're cowards who refuse to take sides. We took a side, but oops, the wrong side. So that's how the movie was perceived at the time, even just a month later.
And in case it wasn't super clear, that's 1,000 different perspectives.
Yes. So yeah, he wrote this article called Defending Munich and kind of explaining what they were trying to do with this film. But you found the article, Josh, so if you want to give us some insights from it. I wrote down a few notes, but
I didn't really take any notes, so I'll leave it to you.
Okay, yeah. So he mentions at the beginning the accusations from all sides that the movie received, which I think is very interesting because it's a movie that is so sort of disillusioned and kind of showing a situation and the reaction to those situations and the journey the characters go through, but it's not necessarily always it is telling you how to feel, but not in the same way that a Spielberg movie usually does. And I think the assumption from the West would be, if you're making a counter-terrorism movie, the point of view is the counter-terrorists, then the counter-terrorists have to be heroes.
They're the heroes.
And in this film,
they're the good guys.
And in this film, they're very much not portrayed as heroes. They're people doing a really dark job, and they feel terrible about it.
That's what I wanted to say.
I think it's complicated, yeah.
Because
it is complicated.
I don't think it's necessarily that they're not displayed as heroes. It's that they're not always displayed as heroes.
Right. And they're not entirely sure of their mission. And that's, I think, even part... I read a few of the op-eds that were criticizing Munich at the time, and a lot of them, it kind of just boils down to, let me back up and say, I think it's interesting that Tony Kushner points out that they were kind of getting criticism from all sides. And I want to say, on principle, that just because you're pissing off all sides does not absolve you of any wrongdoing. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're in the right because you're pissing off everybody. However, in this case, I think reading the specific criticisms of the movie often say a lot about the person who is writing that criticism and what their perspective is. And the perspective you bring to this really informs how you're going to respond to it. And I think that, I think that people who, there are a number of people who did not like the fact that the Israeli people in this movie weren't jazzed about their mission and questioned it at all, because to some people this is the right thing to do, taking the actions that these men took, and irrefutably speaking to some people. And I kind of like that the movie did not show them to be completely confident and showed them questioning. And as Tony Kushner puts out, you'd have to be a sociopath to do what these guys did and not at least think for a second about the morality of it all. Grizz, what do you got?
It is important to note that in the movie, they are jazzed about it at the jump. They're excited to take on this task at the beginning. They are confident that what they're doing is the right course of action. And it is the events that they witness and participate in that begins to change their mind and change their viewpoint, that's the crux of the movie. So,
yeah,
I can see how people would be offended by some things in the movie, but I feel like this is an example of, if you look at a part of this movie, you can find something that might bother you. But if you look at the whole, I think that they do kind of balance each other. So, it's like Josh says, upsetting everybody doesn't absolve you, but in this case, I feel like most of the people who are upset were focusing on one aspect and ignoring other aspects.
Or just really, as Josh said, bringing their own perspective into it. If your perspective is, which a lot of the Western perspective on Israel-Palestine is Palestinians are all, terrorists.
It's complicated. It's very complicated.
But the problem is, from a lot of Western points of view, is not seen as complicated. It's seen as Israel good, Palestine bad.
Yes.
Which is what the movie is not doing. Whenever I think it's very interesting that the movie shows this all through the perspective of Israeli agents, but we throughout the movie meet Palestinian people, and sometimes we even meet the Palestinian people that are on the list, that are the targets, and they are so humanized. There's that scene where one of the targets is with his family, and he's just an ambassador. He's saying things that make sense. He's not being violent in any way. He has feelings for his people and for his home.
Yeah, I want to point out something there, and I think that we need to make a distinction between humanizing the Palestinians and doing both sidesism. I think that some people may have accused this movie of both sidesism in that it equated the Israelis and the Palestinians. I don't think it equated them necessarily. I think it just showed that they both have their reasons for what they're doing. It didn't it didn't pass judgment on those reasons or even explore those reasons in any meaningful way. It just acknowledged the fact that these Palestinian people have reasons for taking the actions they did, just as the Israelis have reasons for taking the actions they did. Again, not passing judgment on those reasons and saying one is more valid than the other, but just the fact that it's not that the Palestinians are just monsters who love bloodshed. They themselves are responding to things in the actions they took,
And that's why having these different perspectives, like people coming in with their own personal perspective, that's why it's so easy to look at these depictions and think that a side is being chosen when I'm not entirely certain that they are choosing sides.
It's more so portraying things that happened and kind of letting you draw your own conclusions, which I think is what the movie excels at. Another thing that Kushner says, he talks about the conflict as a whole, Israel-Palestine, as a tragedy and a struggle over home, as this concept of home and what is home and what isn't home for these people. And the Palestinians were there and they were occupied all of a sudden. And there was other wars. But at the same time, he says he's very critical of Israel for the occupation of West Bank and Gaza, but at the same time, he supports Israel's existence. So it's complicated. And I think Joshi was saying something about this concept of home at the beginning, before we started recording.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of all over the movie. I took a few notes. I'm sorry if I missed some stuff, but Avi or Avner, excuse me.
Avner, yeah.
He sneaks away in order to be present for the birth of his kid. He lies to his team and says he's in New York or something, and he actually goes back to Israel.
Else, but
yeah. And when his daughter is born, he tells his wife, I want you to move to Brooklyn so that you can, so I know, you can be safe and that kind of stuff because I don't feel you're safe in Israel. And she kind of pushes back and says, don't, if your mission forces us to leave Israel, then don't do it. This is our home. And she says she doesn't want her kid to be another homeless Jew, which I think is a very interesting perspective for someone to say who lives in Israel. And then, when he has that conversation, Avner does have a conversation with a PLO agent in, the late second act when they're probably set up by one of their informants when they are put into a safe house in Athens, and then a PLO organization also arrives at the same safe house. But he has a conversation pretending to be a German guy, not an Israeli, and has a conversation with this PLO guy. And this PLO guy basically talks about how the Palestinians are also just looking for a home. And Avner pushes back and says, you can't have land that was never yours, which is, the Israeli perspective on the conflict. But the PLO guy also pushes back on that and says, you don't know what it's like to not have a home. We want to be nations. Home is everything, is something that this guy says to Avner, which is, again, probably the Israeli perspective too, but it's also the Palestinian perspective.
That's what I was going to say was that, that's the impetus for the establishing of Israel after World War II was to give displaced Jews a home. And so, it ends up being at the expense of the Palestinians who lived there, and that's where the origin of this, conflict comes from, obviously. I guess the origin is, centuries earlier than that, but you get my meaning. So, I mean, it's like you said, it's all over this movie. It's the struggle for home is what this focus is about. And it's not just a struggle for home, but to feel safe in your home. So for the Israelis, that's what this is about, is the feeling that they have their home and they can keep it and it's safe. And for the Palestinians, it's about getting their home back. And that's why, I mean, that's a huge element of the controversy here, is that in Israel, it's a very difficult thing to say that you believe that the Palestinians deserve
but not only in Israel, like as we've seen in the last year, where there was renewed conflict and controversy, like it's very difficult in the West to talk about what is happening in Israel Palestine and problematizing the actions of the Israeli government is a problem, inherently difficult position to have.
It's dangerous when anyone believes that any side is above reproach.
Yes,
and that's what I think this movie is illustrating.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, the concept of home kind of dovetails into a conversation about nationalism, like the PLO guy says, like, we want a home, we want to be nations, that kind of stuff. That is everything. And I think this movie, if there's a conclusion drawn, I think it, especially in the third act with Avner, Avner notably ends up in New York with his family, not in Israel at the end of the movie. And like Ephraim, Jeffrey Rush tries to get him to come back to Israel, basically. And, I think Avner would say that home is wherever his wife and daughter are, and that's more important than a nation, possibly. But
interestingly, he wouldn't feel the same way at the beginning of the movie. He's very much patriotic at the beginning, because he, Golda Meir, the Prime Minister of Israel, gives him a mission, and he just accepts it. He doesn't even need to know exactly what it is at the beginning. Like,
also, when he finds out about the Munich terrorist attack that killed 11 Israeli, athletes. I don't remember the exact line, but I think he says to his wife something along the lines of that could have been me. I'm just an Israeli guy. That could have happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
Which again I think is telling.
Yeah. So I think that leads us into the idea of viewing this film in a post 9/11 lens, which is something that we've mentioned before. It kind of does fit with that idea of nationalism and kind of criticizing sort of blind allegiance to one's government and that kind of thing.
Also, the very raw emotional response to terrorism, which is to desire for revenge.
Yes.
Yes.
That's baked into the DNA of this movie, and also baked in the DNA of the early 2000s in America.
Desire for vengeance. I mean, that's what the book was. The book was titled Vengeance. So, I mean, it makes sense that in the post 9/11 world that this was a topic that warranted discussion, but it is also a very bold topic for any filmmaker to take on, especially in that time period. So in some way, this feels like a movie that Spielberg is one of the few directors that could have made this movie at that time, because of Spielberg's beloved nature among Western audiences, particularly in the United States. I think that people may be more receptive to hearing this message from Steven Spielberg, or might be more willing to go see it without knowing exactly what the message is going to be. For that reason,
I think the fact that the movie was so controversial after release shows that maybe that's only partly true. But it's certainly true at this time of his career that he could get this film made, which I don't think is so easy. Like, I don't think anyone can get this made, considering how complex the issue that it's tackling is, and considering this is like the time of the Patriot Act. This is the time of when you have, after the immediate reaction to terrorism, which is, you want revenge, but then you start thinking about what those counter-terrorist actions are, and whether they are, going beyond international law, for example, which is something that actions that a lot of governments have done in retaliation to terrorist attacks. And you start questioning your allegiance and your sort of agreement with what your own government is doing. But I think the film portrays beautifully through Avner. Like, the way he changes throughout the movie is kind of the point of view that the audience might have while watching the movie.
I just wanted to try to articulate my point a little more succinctly and clearly that another director, a less well-known director, I think would have received an even larger backlash than Steven Spielberg did. And especially given the time that the movie released. That's what I'm trying to articulate.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fair. How do we feel? Okay, we didn't mention this before, but again, I think Avner's journey and the way he changes from beginning to end is the strongest suit of the film in terms of just character development. He's the only one that really has an arc, but I think it's a really powerful one. And is this Eric Bana's best performance? This guy hasn't made that many really good movies, but I think he's
fantastic. I don't know what else it would be if
this.
Not this.
Yeah, I can't think of something.
He's so good. He's so good in this.
I did find myself thinking Eric Bana has not been given the opportunities he deserves based on his performance in this. I feel like he should have had more opportunities to showcase his talents. I mean, he's done some voice acting that, he's in some popular, animated things, but I don't think that
I don't know if that's
quite
I know him from this. I know him from the Ang Lee Hulk movie, and I know him from Funny People, where he's kind of in the back half of that movie. I don't know much beyond those.
I mean, he was in Star Trek.
Troy.
Yeah.
Troy. I have not seen Troy. Yeah.
Black Hawk Down.
He's in Black Hawk Down. Yeah.
Everyone's in Black Hawk Down. I haven't seen that either.
It's a very large cast in Black Hawk Down.
Yeah.
Okay, so
he had a voice in Mary and Max, I think, which is a movie that I really, really enjoy. If you guys haven't seen that, check it out.
So, I think we mentioned some of the themes of the film. I don't know if I wrote down some I kind of wrote down an outline of the plot of the film. I don't know if there's some sequences or moments that stand out to you.
Well, hold on. I don't want to go beyond the 9/11 thing. Can I?
Okay, no, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So Spielberg made this and War of the Worlds in 2005, and there's some very, very overt imagery in War of the Worlds that is evocative of 9/11. The ones off the top of my head are, there's a scene of Tom Cruise just kind of covered in this gray dust, which is very, evoking what people looked like on ground zero after the towers collapsed, covered in dust. There's a moment where Tom Cruise and Dakota Fanning walk past this wall where there's homemade poster boards of pictures of people who had died, memorializing them, which you saw at Ground Zero, and continue to see at Ground Zero. And then there's the scene in War of the Worlds where the army is driving past Robbie and Tom Cruise and his son Robbie, and his son Robbie, who's 16 and becoming a man, really, really wants to follow the army and join up with them. And there's this big emotional scene where he yells at Tom Cruise, "We got to join up with these guys and get back at them. We got to get back at them," which is very clearly how a lot of Americans thought in 2002, 2003, post 9/11. And it's also, War of the Worlds is an invasion narrative, which was, something that was created in Great Britain in the late 1800s when, the idea of either Germans or French people invading, a world superpower was this ludicrous idea, but, that's kind of... There's a reason Spielberg made an invasion narrative after 9/11 when, the superpower was kind of brought to its knees in a way that we never thought possible and that kind of thing. And then, obviously, Munich that same year, and... if you're not convinced that Munich is about the U.S. response to 9/11, then I ask you to watch the final shot of the movie, where Avner has a conversation with Ephraim about why they did all this, and, every guy we killed is going to be replaced with 6 more guys, when does this end, and then Ephraim walks away, and Avner walks away, and then in the background, as the credits roll, is the Twin Towers. So, Spielberg's not shy about what the message of the movie is, and... again, especially because the story begins as a direct response to an act of terrorism, and then it kind of becomes about bigger issues than that. That's a very loaded movie to make in 4 years after 9/11. When we were in the midst of a direct response, ostensibly, to terrorism. But this movie also acknowledges that the Palestinian terrorists didn't just come out of nowhere. And so therefore you're kind of forced to reckon that the Saudi Arabians and the people who hijacked the planes didn't just come out of nowhere, Grizz, what do you got?
Do you think that this movie would have a different response if it released today? or would it still receive a lot of the same backlash, or at least would the backlash have been lessened?
I think the feelings about the United States response to 9/11 were more complicated in 2005, and now 20 years later, as we're just now getting out of Afghanistan and Iraq, like after being there for 20 years, I think the country sees it differently a little bit now, and I think may have been a little bit more receptive to the message of the movie, which is, will this revenge solve anything or make anybody feel any better, or is it just a perpetuating a cycle that's not gonna be solved anytime soon? I don't really know. It might have been a little bit more warmly received nowadays. I don't know though.
I don't think the movie is as big if it comes out now. I don't think in terms of narrative, like the movie wasn't like a gigantic box office hit, but I don't think in terms of narrative it would be as big today as it was in 2005. Like, I just think
it's interesting that the movie had to come out when it did.
Yeah. For
the message to be at its most powerful,
valuable. Yeah.
But by coming out it also meant people were.
Hang on. But to be fair, I think it's completely poignant today.
Oh, it sure is. It definitely is.
I think the message of governments creating narratives that are, unimpeachable. These people are evil. We must destroy them. And you coming to terms with your own governments doing that sort of thing and kind of becoming disillusioned with your own government is an eternal message.
Yes. I meant in more in terms of the 9/11.
But yes, in terms of the 9/11 impact, for sure.
Impact here, I think that just by releasing when it did, that's when the message was the most powerful. But had it released today, then people might have been more receptive to that message. And it's an interesting dilemma for when can you tell a story, What's next, Hugo?
So I think we can kind of jump to sort of the latter parts of the film. We've mentioned some of the things that happened in the beginning. We mentioned them assassinating some of their targets. We don't see all of them, but I think the three big ones that we see is the one at the beginning that you mentioned, George, where they just kind of shoot them in an alley in Rome. Then there's the one where they plan to bomb in the phone of another target's home. Which is a really great sequence because you have that sequence where the daughter of this person comes back and they have to stop the bomb because they don't want to actually kill his kids. They just want to take him out, which is another great sequence. And then we have the big raid in Beirut. So all sequences that we've kind of mentioned. But what
and
I think
the hotel room bomb under the bed.
And the hotel bomb under the bed, which is another really, really, really well made part.
I think that's one of the ones where I think that's when Eric Bana's character Abner gets that's one of the first real doses of there's other consequences to what we're doing, because there are innocent people who get caught in that crossfire there. But yeah, I think that one was one of the most powerful assassinations that they discuss in this movie, for me anyways.
Then we get the scene in Athens where they are put into this safe house and they kind of run into the PLO operatives, and there's this conversation that we already mentioned between Avner and Ali, which is a PLO operative, about the conflict between Israel and Palestine, and it's kind of giving you perspective, which is what the movie is really trying to do throughout. Finally, I think where he really becomes completely disillusioned is when he starts getting news that all the people who they killed are just being substituted as somebody else takes their post, and then slowly the team itself starts losing people. So Carl gets killed by a contract killer, and they themselves then find this contract killer and go murder her, which I think is a moment where afterwards they kind of start thinking, well, that was just a person that was paid for a job, and in some ways aren't we doing exactly the same?
We are people paid to do exactly what
she had nothing to do with this conflict at all, but we still did it. So maybe what we're doing is kind of eroding our humanity in some way, which is, I think is a really interesting sequence.
That's a tough sequence. Both Kieran Hines' death and getting revenge for Kieran Hines' death, assassinating the Dutch assassin. Those are two rough sequences.
Yeah, but powerful, I think. Other members start. Hans is found dead, stabbed, and then Robert, who is the toy / bomb maker, basically blows himself up. I think we're led to believe that he felt so much guilt for what he had been doing because he expresses that guilt. He leaves the team earlier. He kind of blew himself up intentionally. I'm not entirely. I don't think because he doesn't speak any dialogue, so it's not 100% confirmed.
He says earlier that he's not a bomb maker; he's a bomb diffuser.
That's true.
He's a toy maker, and so he is like a lot of his bombs for their assassinations they're attempting don't work quite right. They're too powerful or not powerful enough. And then we see him making a bomb, and then it detonates. So I think we're maybe supposed to infer that he mistakenly blew himself up.
That's the one point in this movie where I'm not clear. Is he? And maybe there's some poignance to that, is that we're not sure if he did it to himself on purpose because of the guilt he was feeling, or if it was truly an accident, or was he set up? Because other people had just been assassinated. So
yeah, true.
Did someone give him bomb-making materials that would lead him to blow himself up, for example, I think is a very good possibility. Real quick, I want to say before we move away from the Dutch assassin, I think it's interesting that, Avner sees her at the bar was it in Athens where they were?
No, I think
don't know,
London.
Regardless of London. Okay, so he sees her at the bar, kind of like flirts with her for a few minutes, and then goes to bed. But when he's flirting with her, he asks her what kind of work she does, and she says the kind of work that makes him want to drink. And he says, flirtatiously, sounds like we have the same job.
Yeah.
Which is just him flirting, but he's actually correct in that they're both assassins. He just doesn't know that at the time. But it is kind of like, in some ways, equating what she does with what they're doing. So, they respond to her actions by tracking her down and killing her, but they're no better than her, I think is what you're supposed to deduce there.
Or at least they feel that they're no better than her, which is,
and then
but they feel that
Hans
only too late, by the way. They come to that conclusion too late.
Yeah. And Hans is found stabbed stabbed to death in a bench. We see Avner, because of the killings, become increasingly disillusioned and also increasingly paranoid. I think there's that really intense scene where he's pulling apart his whole apartment or the room in his apartment, which is kind of a reference to, I think, to the film The Conversation, where he's just pulling out, trying to find bombs and bugs.
Earlier in the movie, Kieran Hines, Carl, says that he knew a field agent who would begin sleeping in his closet while he was a field agent because he didn't trust. He was so paranoid all the time. But then, even years after he left the field, he still sleeps in his closet to this day, is what he says. And so then Avner, in his hotel room, checks the mattress, because that's how they killed someone earlier, is they put a bomb under his mattress. He also checks his phone, because that's again how they killed someone earlier, putting a bomb in their phone. And then he takes his blanket and sleeps in the closet, which is, telling about where his head's at. Yeah, exactly. And then the sex scene. Do you want to talk about the sex scene?
We're going to get to the sex scene. What was done. So at this point, they do one last attempt on Salame, which is I think the leader of Black September. They fail again. They had already failed previously. And at this point,
hold on. Why did they fail in London?
The Americans showed up
because the Americans kind of showed up and knew that they were going to be there and stopped them. The movie is unclear whether it's CIA. We don't exactly know what.
But the important part is that we know that Salame was giving information to the Americans. And
he was, yes.
So that's why they're there, to protect their source.
Right before Avner and Steve are about to shoot Salame, they are stopped by 3 Americans on the street who pretend to just be drunk tourists who think they recognize Avner, but they actually don't. But then they later deduce, that was probably CIA guys preventing us from taking out Salame. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we don't know for sure. But probably.
I did have one other thing I wanted to talk about before the sex scene.
Absolutely.
That's the ending of the movie, more or less, here. But I wanted to talk about Louis and his father.
Sure.
Because they are, as we established, the organization that keeps locating the targets. I think that they are fascinating characters because in this movie, in which is so much about picking sides, or and whether or not that's a good thing. We also have these two characters who are the embodiment of not choosing a side. They establish that they sell information to everyone. So what do you guys make of...
Except
for governments.
Say they don't work for governments, which is very interesting. And they know they're bad people, but their justification is, we do this only for family. We built our family. That's all we care about.
Home.
Anything else is just home. Yeah.
So
and family specifically, because I think in some ways through knowing them, Avner comes to the conclusion that maybe all of this was not worth it at all, and he just wants to return to his family.
Well, I think it kind of shows that the eventual conclusion of the movie might be that these guys are pawns in the most literal sense. In the fact that, Ephraim does tell Avner at the end of the movie, you weren't the only team. We have guys just like you doing similar missions everywhere. But, the fact that 3 of the 5 guys died is kind of just that's part of it. That's what's going to happen.
The cost of doing business.
Exactly, the cost of doing business. And, you kind of never really get a big picture sense of, what this was all for, which is what Avner talks with Ephraim about at the end, is, he asked him, did we do any good? Did we just, take out one guy so that another guy could take his place? Did we accomplish anything? What was the point of all this?
And what Ephraim says is shows you the perspective of the government, which he says, well, you cut your nails and they grow back. Almost as to say, well, but you still have to keep killing these people, even though they're just going to put somebody else there. That's what we're doing. This is the conflict.
But
Which
again,
is a really dark thing to say.
Yes, and the idea of nationalism, people, Avner and his team were doing this for Israel, but does Israel feel as precious about Avner and his team as they do about Israel? And arguably no. Arguably these guys are just tools in this shady, generations-long conflict that's just going to keep perpetuating. Grizz, what do you got?
So particularly with Louis and his father here, I think it's interesting because this movie is so much about showing every side, every viewpoint, and showing that no viewpoint is inherently perfect or anything like that. And then you have... that might lead people to think that, so this movie is about not choosing a side. But then we have these characters, Louis and his father, that are the embodiment of not choosing a side, and we see that even not choosing a side has its consequences and its perils, and they're not above it all. They're still very much involved in this very dark and seedy business, and so that even not choosing a side is choosing a side is essentially
which I think is why I said at the beginning this is Spielberg's most cynical and disillusioned film, because nobody comes out of this clean. Nobody comes out of this a good person, a good character. There's no, they are human, and you understand all of their reasons because the film is so well made and portrays them so well. But you're left with a feeling of, what was this all for? Are we all just awful?
Well, and in particular with Louis and his father, they're always shown in this very romanticized world. We meet Louis in Paris, right? We meet his father's, he's got
beautiful French
countryside, and so there's idealistic, world in which these are the guys who didn't choose a side. Look how great things are for them, but we learn what the cost of all that is, and the expenses that it takes on other people to not choose a side. I just think that they're one of the most fascinating elements of the movie for me.
Yeah, and every element of the movie kind of contributes to the themes of the film in multiple ways, which is good to point out. So we talked about the actual end of the movie, which is when Avner and Ephraim have the final confrontation.
What was all this for conversation? But we need to talk about the sex scene. So what Avner does is he doesn't want to work for the Israeli government anymore, so he goes to Brooklyn and he's just going to spend time with his family. But he keeps being extremely paranoid, and I think the implication is that followed,
he has
that kind of stuff.
The implication is kind of that he has PTSD from what he did, and there's this very strange climactic sex scene which is shot in this very kind of sensationalistic style. There's sweat going all over the place. The score is really strong, And it's particularly striking because at the beginning of the film, we have this other sex scene between Avner and his wife that is very sweet. It's very understated. It's very much just two people in love making
tender.
love.
Yeah.
Intimate. Yeah, it's sweet. You know, it's also shot with warm colors, and at the end it's just like grey and
Austere,
very
grainy,
austere and dark. Yeah.
And what's it intercut with?
And it's intercut with the final part of the 1972 attack, the Olympics, because we didn't talk about this, but the way the attack at the Olympics is shown in the movie is in chunks. Like there's a part at the beginning, then we get news about what actually happened, but we don't see it, and then eventually in the film we get to see more parts until this conclusion.
Yes, but it's not until the sex scene that we actually see the Israeli athletes die, for example.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you look at the faces of the victims of the attack in these scenes, and it's gut wrenching.
Yeah.
But what happens with Avner is that I think what the point is, he's having flashes of this attack he didn't even see, but that was the precipice, the impetus to have him take the actions that he took, which will haunt him for the rest of his life and will, make it so he never has a moment of peace ever again, including in these otherwise would be tender, intimate moments. He cannot enjoy them because he will never know peace, which is a freaking bummer, man. That sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and the movie
nothing.
ends.
You guys got nothing on this?
No, I mean,
no.
You nailed it.
It ends in a really dark place.
Well, I mean, I also think that people kind of laugh at this because it is a very overwrought. Again, like slow mo. Eric Bana's like screaming,
he's screaming
in terror as he.
I think the
potentially is
extreme amount. I think the extreme amount of sweat is just a tiny bit too far.
Sure,
like,
but also
it's more.
Can you think of another Spielberg
something.
sex scene? Can you think of another Spielberg sex scene? I
Just
can't.
the one earlier in the movie.
There's the one earlier in the movie,
and there's Catch Me If You Can, I think, is
Catch Me If You Can.
as overt as he usually gets, but that's just shows things shaking above a bed, and then it cuts to them somewhat post-coital, and that's as close as I can think of. So
there is implied sex in all of the Indiana Jones movies.
Implied is one thing, but this is not implied. There's nothing implied about this scene here. But my point is, I think it's odd because it's an odd juxtaposition, and it's also overly wrought, but also we're not used to seeing Spielberg's version of this. So I think part of it is just the jarringness of that. Mm-hmm. So.
But the movie ends in a dark place, so I guess we don't have any very positive, strong final things to say, but do you have any final thoughts about the movie overall? And do we want to rank it?
It ends in a dark place, but that's kind of the point. It's exactly what the ending is supposed to leave you feeling, is a little distraught, a little sad for the state of the world, and questioning your own outlook on things. And so it delivers on that, which is great filmmaking.
Well said. I mean, like I said about In Bruges, entertains you but also makes you think. And I think this definitely qualifies as that. Entertains you but also horrifies you, but also kind of makes you sit for a while and think, man, world's messed up.
And I do think that in comparison to In Bruges, where it does make you think, but there's a lot of fun to that movie. There's not a whole lot of fun to this.
No, not at all, actually.
And as far as you can tell from our conversation that we had today that the impact of this movie is less about what you see on screen and more about what you feel. And that's an important thing to do with movies sometimes. So let's rank it.
All right.
Who
would like to start? Grizz, you start.
I think I'm probably lowest on it in my rankings. And I just got through saying how important it is about the way this movie makes you feel, but I think on just grading it on that alone would be unfair to the other movies on the list, right? So in my approach for where I'm putting on the rankings, I have it just below Rudy, and that's probably just dramatically offensive to Hugo's mind, but so that's where I have it at number 28, is just after Rudy on our list. I looked through the list and was comparing it for a lot of reasons. But I just think ultimately there's more memorable movies ahead of on our list and more enjoyable for me on a personal level.
Okay, Josh, what do you got?
This may be some recency bias, but I'm putting it at 15, just behind Chinatown. And just some notable things that it's ahead of. It's ahead of Scream at 20. It's ahead of Adaptation at 19. It's ahead of The Lighthouse at 17. It's ahead of In Bruges at 16. So a lot of movies that I really, really, really enjoy, I'm putting ahead of. But again, that might be a recency bias thing, but that's what my gut says. So I'm going number 15, just behind Chinatown.
And I guess I'm the highest then. I think this movie is great.
That's excellent. I think it's excellent. Yeah.
It really reflects my perspective on what the situation in Israel and Palestine is, as a person who is Jewish, but isn't, overtly pro-Israel or Zionist. I think it's very important that this type of voice exists in the world, because it's not something that is so as common as it should be, I guess. I have it just outside of my top 5 of Spielberg movies. Like, it's in my top 10. I have it at number 7. So on our list, I would put it at number 12, just below Memories of Murder, and above Citizen Kane, which is always funny to say. But...
Hugo thinks this is a better movie than Citizen Kane. So Hugo has it at 12. I have it at 15. Grizz has it at 28, which averages out to 18.333 repeating. So...
Below the
Wind Rises. Put it just after above. The Wind Rises at number 18.
All right. Just ahead of Adaptation, Scream, and John Wick.
Yes.
Cool.
So how many movies does that put us at now on our list?
48.
So we are just 2 movies away from our next re-ranking episode where we all give our personal lists a once-over and recategorize them. Looking forward to it, guys.
Yeah, I can't wait. So excited.
So next week my girlfriend is coming to visit me in England, so I won't be available for the podcast, so we'll just skip a week and we'll come back 2 weeks from now with a guest, I believe. Is correct?
Yes, I believe that is our current plan. Our guest will be Will Beeman, who is a well-established Star Wars fan. You can follow him on Twitter. He's a big fan of that. I doubt we're talking a Star Wars movie, but that's probably what you would know him best for. But he is he has a wide breadth of knowledge on a large number of films. He's another one of those people that watches movies the same way that Hugo, Josh, and I do. So really looking forward to having him on the show.
A lot of movies. So we don't know what the film to remember will be, because he will be the one picking the movie as a guest. And but we'll follow RTF_pod, and you'll find out what the movie is for a few weeks from now. And where can people find you guys?
You can find me on twitch.tv/goodgamegrizz. Find me on Twitter at goodgamegrizz and on letterboxd at goodgamegrizz.
You can find me on Twitter at @thesloopjoshb. Find me on YouTube, Movies I Love, So Can You. That's it.
And you can find me on Twitter at Hugo_Pinay and on letterboxd at Hugo Pinay, I think. Yes.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in a few weeks, I guess. Bye.
Bye, everyone.